So welcome everyone. Just want to thank you for coming. As usual, I won't make it remiss of me. I will always say thanks to all who are attending our webinar sessions. We really appreciate it. We know that your time could be spent elsewhere, but you have chosen to spend the time with us, and for that, we are truly grateful. Okay, so as usual, I like to say that we're gonna have fun. Um, we're gonna have some fun today. Today's gonna be a little bit involved, but I'm just gonna do it step by step. Today we're gonna look at all this work now coming together. How can we integrate it with end user tools? And one of the end user tools that we're going to be looking at today is with Power BI. And we're going to look at how everything comes together so that we can display it in this Power BI visual. And if we have some time, we'll also look to see how we can integrate this with Excel. So the first thing I'd like to just confirm, if you're all able to see my screen. And by the Gabriel, if you could just give me a quick acknowledgement if you got the little note that I sent a while ago. All right, thanks. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen. So just let me know if you can see my screen. Can I just get a quick confirmation?
Yes, Steve, we can see it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so again, it's always good to start with this screen because, as I said, webinar series, we're basically going on a journey. And on this journey, using the JET analytics, we said the first step in using the JET analytics is to use the JET data manager, in that the JET data manager allows you to identify the various data sources that you want to bring together to develop your visualizations and your cubes or your business analytics visuals. And we said that with the JET data manager, you can basically identify and integrate many different types of data sources, i.e. databases. So you're not only limited to Microsoft SQL databases, but if you are able to connect to Oracle databases, if there are Oracle databases or Postgres databases or MySQL, even simple text files or Excel files, you're able to do that using the JET Data Manager. And on our screen, you'll notice we have here that from the JET Data Manager, when you bring in your data, you are able to do some initial data cleansing to make sure that you're bringing your data correctly. Some of the data cleansing, for example, will include you only selecting the necessary tables or those tables which are necessary to incorporate into your project. So if you are able to connect to some database source and there are 1,000 data tables, but you only need to connect to about 10, then why do you need to bring in the other 990 tables? So this you do here at the JET Data Manager level. And once you bring in the data using the JET Data Manager, it's brought into what is called a staging database. And in the staging database, really is just a Microsoft SQL repository. And in that repository, that's where you actually bring in the data. Now, the fact that you bring in the repository, it is therefore a confirmation that the data that is brought in, it's only a copy of your source databases. So therefore, there's no need for you to worry or to be concerned if when building the project, your project and your reports or any modifications that you may have to make to data, whether you're doing data cleansing, etc. The question is, what is happening to my data source? Is my data being changed? The answer is no. Because here in the JET staging database, this is where you bring in all the data. And if there are any modifications, i.e. via data cleansing, It is done, therefore, in this JET staging database. From the JET staging database, you move now to the JET data warehouse. And in the JET data warehouse, this is where now you tend to put your data in either data mart, or if you use the extended data warehouse, etc. So you are now really now beginning to build or set the foundation for the building of your cubes. Here also in the JET data warehouse, you're able to create additional tables, because it's very possible that you may have to bring in data that might not be seen or might not be viewable, or it might not be possible to get that data from your original data source. But using the JET data warehouse, you are able to bring in or to create additional data to incorporate in your project. One of the examples we did in a previous webinar, for example, was to create a new date table, because as you know, most visuals most visuals tend to be temporal in nature. That is, they have some kind of a date perspective, whether you're going to look at something daily or weekly or quarterly or semi-annually or annually. So that can be done here in the JET data warehouse. Then we started to spend some time in the JET analysis services. As we pointed out earlier, that when you install Microsoft SQL Server, you can install both the regular database engine, but you can also include to install what is called analysis services. Analysis services creates what is called multidimensional databases, where from the multidimensional databases, it formats the data or structures the data in such so that you can see your data in the form of a cube. So you may remember this little game that used to be purchased some years ago called the Rubik's Cube. So therefore, by you using a cube type approach, it's a more efficient way for you to therefore summarize and aggregate your data. So here we are now. We started to look at the end user tools. One of the tools we looked at, for example, was Excel. How you're able to bring in your data using Excel. Today, we're going to take it a step further because in our last webinar, we started to look at using what is called the JET dashboard, where we recognize that the suppliers of the software actually gave you a dashboard which allows you to use maybe the standard visuals that come with the JET product, or giving you the ability to create your own customized visuals and share it with persons in the organization. But for today, we're going to be looking at Power BI. As you know, Power BI is a very useful and advanced tool for presenting data by way of visuals or visualization. And a lot of organizations right now are subscribing to using Power BI as one of your end user tools. Now, the fact that you're seeing here that you're only seeing the JET Reports Excel add-in or the Power BI user or the Office 365 Excel online, that does not mean that your end user tools are limited to only any of these three products. You can use any visualization tool as long as that visualization tool is able to connect to the Microsoft SQL analysis services, because it is the analysis services that allows connectivity to the multidimensional database. And I will show it to you as we move further in our project. So like I said, you're therefore not limited. Oops, you are not limited. Let me just get back to the screen. You're not limited to these three, as these three were just given as an example. So today we're going to be looking at the Power BI. How can we integrate with Power BI? So I am going to, let's just give me a second. Let me, good. So now we're into more familiar territory, which you should be familiar with because we've been doing a lot of our work using the Jet Data Manager server. Good. So here again, we have opened the project for GP. And even though I've opened it and I've been using GP, the fact is that you can use it for any, the concept rather is the same, whether we're using a project which is for Business Central or Dynamics NAV, etc. I just, for consistency, just used the GP database. So you are familiar with the Selection Explorer. And looking at the PowerPoint slide that we looked at earlier, remember we said here, for example, the business unit. Under the business unit, you have your staging database. And as well, also under the business unit, we had our data source. So our data source identified, or this is where you set up the tables and the connection string to your GP database so that you can use it in your project. So we would have been familiar with this. And then from the business unit where we created our staging database, we then went to our data warehouse. So if I were to open this node, which represents our data warehouse, here you can see the Jet data warehouse, and it is being stored in a SQL database, which is called Jet GP data warehouse. And here we see the list of tables. So this is just a quick revision because we did go through this in previous webinars. So in moving from the staging database, did your additional data cleansing, data selection, modification of your data, and then moved it over now to the Jet GP data warehouse. I'm just going to close this node. From the data warehouse, we then introduced what is called now the Olap, and where we said that Olap represented, the acronym was for the online analytical processing. And I will just close the data warehouse so that I can get some more space. And there in the Olap is where we would have defined our cubes, where we said that for the standard project, we said here that there were 6 cubes. Now here is where I want us now to pay particular attention, because as we're now moving into Power BI, we're going to bringing back or reintroducing some of these nodes. So it's important for us to just quickly go through them again. So we said in our cubes, here 6 standard cubes were developed for us by the Jet team. But remembering though that you have the ability to modify the cubes, to delete a cube, or even to create your own cube. And we're saying here for each of the cubes, a cube consists of other nodes, which are measures, scripts, or dimensions. And for the scope of our webinar, we only spend time on measures and dimension. And we said that a measure is simply some kind of aggregate that was computed, a computed aggregate. And we identified that an aggregate function was some mathematical function, which could be either summation. Some examples therefore of aggregate functions include summation, minimum, maximum, first value, last value, standard deviation, variance, etc. So the thing to note about measures is that they are all numeric in basis, in result. So here are your measures, for example, sales, as we said, and these are the various measures that would have been calculated. So for instance, things like quantity, inventory valuation, quantity sales, coming from the sales transactions table, etc. Now, if I were to right click rather, the cube, the sales cube, here again, we have the context sensitive help. And if I were to highlight the edit cube, again, just a quick revision, right? You'll notice now I'm seeing my list of tables which come from my data warehouse. So from my list of tables which come from my data warehouse, whichever table is selected, those tables which are selected from your data warehouse are known as fact tables. In other words, you're saying these are the tables from which your facts will be calculated. So a fact table is a data warehouse table that has been selected for a cube. Say it again. A fact table is a data warehouse table that has been selected and applied to a cube. So for here, we have 5 fact tables which have been selected: inventory valuation, sales change transactions table, sales commission transactions, sales financial transactions, and the sales transactions. So we only needed, in developing our sales cube, to select only 5 tables from our data warehouse. And these 5 tables selected are now called our fact tables. We then also looked at dimensions. Okay? And these are the selected dimensions. Let me just expand the node that are used against our measures, or that are used rather against the fact tables to calculate our measures. So we then said, what is a dimension? We said a dimension is there for a perspective. It gives you some perspective of how you view your data. So for instance, if you had a measure that related to sales, good, that data by itself is just one summation aggregate, which is the sales data. However, you could probably choose to analyze the sales data from either a dimension or a perspective of a salesperson. So it would therefore aggregate the sales data from the viewpoint or from the perspective of the salesperson. Also, you might want to look at it based on the document date. So therefore, you're able to see what were the daily sales. Or maybe if you had, you wanted to look at your sales data by location. So therefore, if you had $1 million worth of sales, but analyzed by location, you'll realize that maybe your Eastern warehouse probably did 700,000 and your Western sales house 300,000. But maybe if you chose to evaluate it by company, or rather by customer, that same $1 million can now be broken up into the customer constituents that did make up that $1 million sales. So that really is in dimensions. So now, therefore, that we have created these cubes, if you are in an environment that uses Power BI, the question is now, how can this data be used by an end user tool such as Power BI? Well, we're going to do it today, step by step. Now, you will first, or you'd have to first appreciate that once you create and build your cubes, you have to deploy your cubes. So I'm just going to deploy, or what is called an execute here. A deploy and execute. Now, what does a deploy and execute do? Knowing that deploy also is a menu item and execute. So here's a separation. When you run just a deploy, the program or the Jet Data Manager compiles your project and looks at the the table structures that may have changed, and then it updates the table structure. So therefore, if you created new tables, new fields, or you edited a field, or you deleted a field, deleted a table, anything relating to the structure of a table, good. To run a deploy, the deploy routine updates the project. It updates the distributable project so that persons who use the end user tools are able to see the new structure. However, by running the deploy alone, whilst the table structure is updated, the data is not updated. If you run an execute, the execute actually does the opposite, meaning the execute updates the data without changing or updating the structure of the actual project tables itself. So why is there a need to separate the two? Well, it might be possible that you might have a very, very large project, which might take some time to update. And rather than running a routine which updates, or rather than updating both the structure and the data, if you are pretty confident that your table structure has not changed, then you might just need to update the data. So therefore, in this case, by just simply running the execute option, then your project will be updated with the latest data from your data sources. However, if you are not confident that you would have remembered that, whether you made a change to your table structure or not, I would advise you to basically run both the deploy and execute. And therefore, in running both the deploy and execute, it is suggested that you run it usually at a time when most people tend not to be using the cubes. So therefore, it gives it time to both update the structure as well as the data. So I'm just going to quickly run the deploy and or execute. I'm going to start it. So what it is doing here now is that it is going through all the project objects which are a part of this project. So therefore, it's ensuring that the table structures are now updated. That is, the table structures which will be used by end users are updated. And it is also ensuring that the data that is being applied is updated. In one of our upcoming webinars, I'll actually show you how to schedule a deploy and execute. So therefore, you don't have to make this a manual process, but you can actually make it an automated process. And therefore, by automating the process, you could schedule the updates maybe once a day, maybe at nights, or maybe early in the mornings, then at midday, maybe when most people go to lunch, and then again at nights. Or you can create what is called a perspective, where maybe those objects relating to, say, the sales cube get updated regularly, more regularly, because you want to ensure that your sales agents or your sales persons get the most up-to-date information as possible. But maybe your finance team only need to get data once in the morning. So therefore, you could actually just update only the finance cube along with the objects related to the finance cube, and they'll be updated accordingly. But that will be in an upcoming webinar that will be scheduled. So here we see now it is 100% and it's now complete. So what have we just done? We have basically run a compilation on our project using both the deploy and execute methodology. So therefore, the structure that is going to be used by the end user tools, in this case, our PowerBI, has the latest and the most up-to-date table structure. also the data that will be used by our end users has the most or the latest, the up-to-date data. So we can now close. Good. Now I want you to make a note. You can do it visually or mentally. Here, Jet GP Olap. This is the name of our database. So if I were to edit, good. You'll notice Jet GP Olap. This is the name of our database that can be found in analysis services. So we need to make a note of this. Jet GP Olap. So let's make a mental note. So let us now look at our end user tools. For those of you who are probably familiar or who are not familiar with Power BI, Power BI comes in many different modules. For example, you have the Power BI server service and the Power BI desktop. Now, the Power BI desktop is an end user tool that you can download for free. Good. You can download for free from Microsoft's website. You can simply just go in Google and just type download rather Power BI desktop. Now, in saying that it is free, I'm therefore saying that all the development tools available in Power BI desktop, it's free for you to use, free for you to develop. However, if you have an unlicensed version of Power BI, there are some features which are disabled or some functionality. One, for example, is the ability for you to publish your project so that other persons can see the results or you're able to share your project. The unlicensed and the free version does not allow you to publish and share your Power BI visuals. That is your dashboard, your reports, your pages, etc. And the reason why you're not able to share it is because you would need what is called a Power BI service in order to push, or rather to publish your project to a repository in the service, and then allowing other individuals or other persons or users within the organization to get access to your reports. So there are a few more other disadvantages by using an unlicensed. So how would you get around it? Well, it would just mean that if you wanted other persons to be able to see your reports, you would have to basically make a copy of your project file and email it or send it or pass it around to all persons. And that can be cumbersome because it means now that you'd have to keep track of everybody who has a copy of your reports, or rather your Power BI project. And then you know have to wonder, is everybody up to date, etc., etc. So there are pluses and minuses for everything, right? But the ideal thing would be, yes, to get a licensed copy. But the Power BI desktop is actually free. So I'm looking here at one which is actually free. So how do we connect the Power BI to our data source? Remembering again that I'm just going to quickly go here. I asked you to keep in your mind's eye this name, Jet GP Olap. That is the name of the Microsoft SQL Analysis Services database, which is needed for us to connect to the to Power BI. So I'm going to actually open. So if we look back, this is actually a project which has already been connected. So let us see if we can actually replicate this. So I'm going to open. I click Power BI desktop. So I've already downloaded and installed the Power BI desktop. So let's just give it a couple of seconds to open. So what are we going to be doing now? As soon as the Power BI desktop is opened, I'm going to just take a couple of minutes and just literally just introduce you to Power BI. And what, let's just do this. All right, and just to let you know what some of the panels are and really just what's what. Let's just give it a few seconds to start. It's taking a little longer. Okay, beautiful, beautiful. All right. So this is a typical Power BI environment. Good. Now, where I would like to start is actually on the right-hand side. So you'll notice here that there's a panel called fields. So if I should expand fields, right here, there's nothing that's listed. It's actually blank. And that is because this is a new file. Nothing has been created. No data source has been identified. And as such, there's nothing listed in the fields panel. Good. So let's collapse it. Beside the fields panel is what is called visualizations. Good. And these are the standard visualizations that come with Power BI. So for instance, if I should just go through a couple, this is a stat bar chart, stat column chart. We notice the line chart, which is more temporal in basis. Then, you know, you have the standard part, pie chart, what is called the tree map. For instance, if you have data that has, for instance, locations that uses a map, maybe the zip code or address or country, you're able to use a field map, which brings actually the map of the country together once you have the latitude and longitudinal coordinates in your data set. Let's look on a few others. Multi-row card. The more popular ones that are used are what is called a slicer. We're able to do slicing and dicing of your data. Also a simple table, or what is called a matrix. A matrix visual is somewhat similar to a pivot table. So these are the visuals. Now you may ask, are you only limited to these visuals? And the answer is no, because you are able to click on this ellipsis button, which says get more visuals, and the get more visuals ellipsis button allows you to download customized visuals into your repository, whether you want to use a visual which someone or a company created, whether under license or an open source, or you may actually download from the Microsoft Power BI marketplace, where persons properly register, individuals or companies properly register the visuals that they have created, and therefore are willing to make it available for users to use within their Power BI project. So these are really just the more standard visuals which tend to be used. But if you want to get additional visuals, you can click this ellipsis button, and the ellipsis button allows you access for more visuals. Here also on the left, you're able to see these icons, which allow you, for instance, to see what is called the data model. It shows the various tables and the relationship between the tables. Also, when you import data, you're able to see the data in your fields list, but also the report. This is where you actually design your reports. So This is called the canvas. And when you create your visuals on the canvas, you can either define or set the properties for the dimensions of your canvas, i.e. the length of the canvas and the width of your canvas by going to the canvas properties, or you may wish to create a report which has multiple pages. So therefore, we're now introducing some new terminologies. On the canvas, you can put multiple visuals. And if your visuals only have one page, or yes, if your visuals only use one page, then this is a report with one page of visuals. If, however, you needed to create multiple pages because you wanted to add additional visuals, then by clicking this plus here, then you notice I now have page 2. So in this case, my report would consist of 2 pages where each page has several visuals. So we'll stick today to just page 1. Now, how do we therefore bring in our data? From our ribbon on top, you'll notice that there's an icon which says Get Data. Now, if you click the Get Data drop down, you will see a list of all the more popular data sources. So these are called common data sources. So meaning to say that most of your data tends to come from either Excel or Power BI data sets or Power BI data flows, or maybe from SQL Server or analysis services, etc. So what we want will be coming from analysis services. But what I'm going to do first, I'm going to click the more icon to just give you an idea of the kinds of data sources. So if you'll here now your get data is now grouped. You can either see a full listing of all your data sources if you were to click all, and this is important because Power BI is updated from my experience at least maybe once every 3 months. And one of the ways or one of the areas in which Power BI is always updated is actually in the data source, because there are always a lot of data, new data sources coming on the market. So Power BI is always updating. The developers are always updating so that it adds new data sources so that you're able to connect to them. If I wanted to look at just file-based data sources, here they are on the right. If I wanted to look at database, only those which use database engines, here they are. So what am I looking for? I'd be looking for, let me do a search here. Look by all. It's taking a little time. Good. I would want to look for analysis services. So here is SQL Server Analysis Services Database. So I highlight that I want to connect to an SQL Server Analysis Services database, then I click Connect. And when I click Connect, a pop-up window is going to come asking me to identify the server and the database. Now, I know in my environment, I created a server which is called home. So this is the server that I'm actually operating from. Well, the next question is, what database am I using? And the answer is this. Do you remember when I asked you to just put in your mind's eye the name of this database, Jet GP Olap? If I right click here, that's the name of the database, Jet GP Olap. So I'm just going to copy it and go back to my connection. Good. So on my home server, I'm going to connect to an analysis services database called JetGP Olap. And I have the option to either do an import and a connect live. And what's the difference between the two? Import will just automatically reach out to the Olap databases and pull the data in one time. It therefore means that the data will not be automatically updated. For you to update the data, you'd have to manually go and do an update on the database. So you may ask, what's the advantage of that? And the answer is simple. It's very possible that you might want to create a data where you know that your data will not be updated. You know that your data is basically fixed. Well, in that case, there's no need for you to be using Connect Live, where you schedule an update like every 5 minutes or 15 minutes or 1 hour every minute when you know that your data won't change. So you can either select to do either an import or to connect live. I'm going to leave it on connect live, which therefore means that when my visuals are being run in Power BI, as the data gets updated in my underlying data source, then those changes or additions will be reflected almost immediately in my dashboards, my Power BI dashboards. So I now click OK. And once I know everything is fine, let's look at this. You'll notice I have 6 nodes here: finance, inventory, payables, purchasing, receivables, sales. So the question now is, what are these 6 nodes? Well, let's take a picture of this in our mind's eye and go back to our development environment. Here they are: finance, inventory, payables, purchases, receivables, sales. So the cubes which were created in Jet Analytics now become viewable here. So we can select whichever of our cubes we want to build our report. So I selected sales. So in selecting sales, I can now click OK. And in clicking OK, let's see what has happened. So it says working on it. Now, do you remember when first we opened a blank Power BI desktop project? There were no listing in fields. But now we're seeing a listing in fields. So the question is, where would all of this data come from? And the answer is this: all of these data is really a combination of, let's get this right. So I'm showing you where everything comes from. Do you remember sales, sales cubes? Do you remember our measures and our dimensions? Good. So everything that was developed underneath our cubes, i.e. our measures and dimensions, are now viewable in our Power BI desktop. Good. Under the fields. So we can now create a simple visualization. What if I should probably use the pie chart? So I'm just going to click the palette just to make sure that it is selected and in focus. And then I will now click the pie chart. So in clicking the pie chart icon is now displayed. I'm not going to be applying any filters because that's not the scope of our webinar. So what I'm going to do now that I've selected my pie chart visual, I'm just expanding it a little and I've highlighted it. Now, once you have highlighted a visual, good, the visual that is highlighted, for the visual that's highlighted, its properties get displayed in the visualizations pane. So one of the things now we have to enter is our data fields, values, etc. Good. So let's look at this now. So where would our values come from? So I'm going to look at maybe the sales transactions table. I'm going to expand it, and I'm going to select my sales data. Again, remember what I'm trying to do is just replicate this. Good. Where I've said in my for my chart, I'm going to be using sales as my values and customer as my legend. So let's do this. So for my value, I have sales. So I select, click and hold and bring it under the values. Under values. Good. So here you'll notice that there was an icon spinning. So as it is here now, there's just one bar. We're seeing that sales was 2,249,851 because it just represents total sales. But remember, we now want to provide some kind of a perspective. So maybe we want to look at the sales from the perspective of, say, the customer. So I scroll down, and customer, which would have been a dimension. So I've selected customer, and here is the customer field. So I click, hold, and drag it and place it in the legend text field area. So here's the icon spinning, and there it is. So if I should just close the visualization somewhere, so there we have it. So what we have done, and this is just a basic example of how we can use a visual that is in our Power BI to display information that is in our Jet Analytics cube. But before we could have done that, we had to first do our data source connection. And this is where we did it on the home, and where it says get data, you're able to select your respective data. So you can actually now build cubes. Maybe you want to put a second cube, a second visual rather, by here, which probably analyzes sales data again. So maybe we might want to look at, let's see if we could see something else. We could look at a stacked bar chart. So what I have to do is highlight the cube, put the stacked bar chart. Maybe I could put the stacked bar chart here. Good. And in my stack bar chart, what I might say is I again want to look at sales data. So I come up, look for sales, because I now want to analyze sales using a different set of parameters. So maybe here, oops, not legend. Let's get this right. I could probably use sales and put it here on my y-axis. Oh, it's not selected. Maybe I have the wrong chart. Yeah, I think I have the wrong chart. I think we'd have to use a stack column. But I think the principle is you're seeing the principle. Let me see if I could probably delete this chart. Could use something else. Let me use a tree map. Good. And then for my tree map, I could put sales here. And then for my category, I could use again, maybe country. Yeah, that should work. Could put country to see if, okay. So I'm seeing here in a tree map format, my data. Good. So before I had my data here as a simple pie chart, but the same data, which would have shown me sales from a customer perspective, I know I'm able to analyze my sales using a tree map where I want to now look at my sales based on country. And from here, I'm able to see that most of my sales are in the United States, then followed by Canada, then followed by Australia, then New Zealand. So you see, I'm able now to use many different visualizations. And I'll show you something. If I were just to highlight country, United States, you'll notice that this visual readjusts itself. So I'm now only seeing sales by customers for those in the United States. If I wanted to, and all I need to do is just to click twice the particular area on the visual. So if I wanted to look at my Canada sales, I just highlight it. And by highlighting the Canada sales in my tree map, it also adjusts my visual by customers. So I'm able to see my 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, this looks like about 14 customers that I have in Canada. If I were to just finally just look at New Zealand and highlight New Zealand, good, then I'm just seeing the customers and their sales values. So that is how you are able to use the visuals. And you know, the Power BI is a very powerful tool. And the challenge would have been how to connect your tool or yes, connect your Power BI to your data, for your JET analytics data. And I was able to show you that you could do this by just simply under the home menu tab, just click get data, and then in selecting get data, you're able to select your analysis services server. And once you just put in all the credentials, then you're good to go. So I really hope that you all enjoyed today's session. I must say that I really enjoyed the time spent with you. Again, I know that for many of you, your time is really precious, but you